A humble janitor spends 20 years quietly cleaning a skyscraper, completely unaware of the billion-dollar secret hidden inside its walls. But when the eccentric billionaire owner suddenly dies, everything changes. Before we continue, let me know in the comments, where are you watching this video from? Drop your city or country below. James Hayes never thought he'd hold the keys to a skyscraper, but then again, he never expected his name to be on the will of a billionaire. The polished marble floor beneath his feet reflected his bewildered expression as he stood in the opulent lobby of Langford Tower, clutching a crisp envelope that had upended his world. "Mr. Hayes, please follow me." A sharp-suited lawyer beckoned him towards the elevator. Mr. Langford's office is on the top floor. James's calloused hands, more accustomed to mops than mahogany, trembled as he stepped into the elevator. The numbers climbed higher, matching the rising tension in his chest. "Why me?" he muttered, his words lost in the hum of the ascending car. The doors slid open, revealing a panoramic view of the city skyline. James's breath caught in his throat. For 20 years, he'd only seen this view through windows he'd cleaned. Sophie Reynolds, a young lawyer with keen eyes and a reassuring smile, greeted him. "Mr. Hayes, welcome. Please have a seat." James lowered himself into a plush leather chair, feeling out of place in his worn janitor's uniform. "Ms. Reynolds, there must be some mistake. I'm just..." "The sole beneficiary of Robert Langford's estate," Sophie finished, sliding a document across the desk, "including this building and all its assets." James's eyes widened. "But I don't understand. Mr. Langford and we barely spoke." Sophie's brow furrowed. Mr. Langford was a complex man. His reasons were his own, but his wishes were clear. She tapped the document. "This is legally binding." A commotion outside the office drew their attention. Through the glass walls, James saw a man in an expensive suit arguing with the receptionist. "That will be Nathaniel Sharp," Sophie sighed. "Mr. Langford's business partner. He's not pleased with the arrangement." The door burst open, and Nathaniel stormed in, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "This is preposterous. A janitor, running a multi-billion-dollar company." James stood, his quiet dignity a stark contrast to Nathaniel's bluster. "Mr. Sharp, I'm as surprised as you are." Nathaniel jabbed a finger at James's chest. "Listen here, Hayes. You're way out of your depth. Sell me the building, take a generous payout, and go back to your mop and bucket where you belong." Sophie stepped between them. "Mr. Sharp, that's enough. The will is clear, and Mr. Hayes is under no obligation to sell." Nathaniel's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." He stormed out, leaving a wake of tension behind him. James sank back into the chair, his head spinning. "What am I supposed to do with Skyscraper?" Sophie's expression softened. "That's entirely up to you, Mr. Hayes. But first, there's something else." She retrieved a sealed envelope from a drawer. "Mr. Langford left this for you, his personal effects." James took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside, he found a letter and an old photograph. His eyes widened as he recognized the woman in the picture, his mother Miriam, decades younger, standing next to a smiling Robert Langford. The letter began, "Dear James, there's so much I should have told you." James's world tilted on its axis as he read Langford's confession. The billionaire had known James's mother intimately. More than that, he believed he was James's biological father. "This can't be true," James whispered, the paper shaking in his grip. Sophie leaned forward, concern etched on her face. "Mr. Hayes, are you all right?" James looked up, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. "He says he thinks he's my father." The revelation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. James's mind raced through a lifetime of memories, searching for clues he might have missed. His mother's evasiveness about his father, the occasional unexplained gifts, the job at Langford Tower that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. "I need some air," James muttered, stumbling towards the door. He found himself on the observation deck. The city sprawled out before him. The wind whipped at his clothes, matching the turbulence in his heart. How could his entire life have been built on a lie? His phone buzzed. A text from Emily. "Dad, how did it go? Are you okay?" James's throat tightened. Emily, his rock, his reason for pushing through each grueling day. How could he tell her that everything they thought they knew about their family was wrong? He typed back, "It's complicated, sweetheart. We'll talk when I get home." As James stared out at the city, the weight of his new reality settled on his shoulders. He wasn't just a janitor anymore. He was the owner of a billion-dollar skyscraper, the son of a tycoon, and the target of a ruthless businessman. The elevator dinged behind him, and Sophie stepped out. "Mr. Hayes, there are some urgent matters we need to discuss." James turned, his jaw set with newfound determination. "Call me James, and let's get to work." Over the next few hours, James's head spun with legal jargon and financial figures that dwarfed anything he'd ever imagined. Sophie patiently explained the intricacies of corporate ownership, board meetings, and shareholder responsibilities. "It's a lot to take in," she admitted, closing a thick binder. "But you don't have to make any decisions right away." James rubbed his temples. "Cecily, Emily's treatments won't wait." Sophie's eyebrows rose. "Emily, my daughter," James explained, a sad smile crossing his face. "She's sick. Rare autoimmune disorder. The medical bills." He trailed off, shaking his head. Understanding dawned in Sophie's eyes. "That's why Mr. Sharp's offer is tempting." James nodded, conflict written across his features. "It would solve everything. But it doesn't feel right," Sophie finished. "No, it doesn't." James stood, pacing the office. "Mr. Langford left this to me for a reason, and after what I've learned about my mother, I can't just walk away." A knock at the door interrupted them. A courier entered, holding a large envelope. "Delivery for James Hayes." James signed for the package, frowning as he opened it. Inside was a stack of legal documents, topped with a note in Nathaniel Sharp's angular handwriting. "Your last chance to walk away quietly." Sophie peered over his shoulder, her face darkening. "He's filing an injunction to freeze the assets. He's claiming you're unfit to manage the company." James's fists clenched. "He's not going to bully me into selling." "No," Sophie agreed, a hint of admiration in her voice. "But he's going to make things very difficult for you." As if on cue, James's phone rang. It was Emily. "Dad, there are reporters outside our apartment. What's going on?" James's heart sank. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'll be home soon, I promise. Don't talk to anyone." He hung up, turning to Sophie with a look of desperation. "I need to protect my daughter. How do I keep her out of this mess?" Sophie's expression turned thoughtful. "We could set up a trust for her, separate from the company assets. It would provide for her care regardless of what happens with Langford Tower." James nodded, grateful for her quick thinking. "Let's do it. And then I need to go home." As they worked on the trust documents, James's mind wandered to the photograph of his mother and Langford. There was something in their expressions, a shared secret that now felt like a ticking time bomb. "Sophie," he said suddenly, "I need to know more about my mother's time here, and about how she died." Sophie looked up, surprised. "Your mother work here?" James nodded. "As a housekeeper, years ago. She died in an accident when I was young. At least, that's what I was told." A shadow crossed Sophie's face. "I'll see what I can find in the archives. But James, be prepared. Digging into the past might uncover things you're not ready to face." "I have to know the truth," James insisted, "for Emily's sake and for mine." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city, James gathered his things to leave. The weight of the day's revelations pressed down on him, but a new resolve burned in his chest. Stepping into the elevator, he caught his reflection in the polished doors. The same face that had cleaned these halls for 2 decades now held the power to change everything. The doors opened on the ground floor, and James stepped out into a sea of flashing cameras and shouted questions. He pushed through the crowd, his mind already racing with plans for tomorrow. As he hailed a taxi, a final thought crystallized in his mind. He might not have asked for this inheritance, but he was damn well going to use it to uncover the truth about Langford, about his mother, and about himself. The taxi pulled away from the curb, leaving the towering silhouette of Langford Tower behind. But James knew he'd be back. This was just the beginning of a journey that would change everything. James stared at the stack of legal documents on his kitchen table, the weight of his newfound responsibilities pressing down on him like a physical force. The morning light filtering through the curtains cast long shadows across the papers, each one a reminder of the battle ahead. Emily's voice broke through his reverie. "Dad, you haven't touched your coffee." He looked up, forcing a smile for his daughter's sake. "Just lost in thought, sweetheart." Emily's perceptive eyes narrowed. "You're worried about a lawsuit, aren't you?" James sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Nathaniel Sharp is pulling out all the stops to challenge the inheritance. Says I'm unfit to manage the company." "That's ridiculous." Emily's fists clenched on the table. "You've worked in that building for 20 years. You know it better than anyone. Knowing how to clean it and knowing how to run are two different things, Em." Emily reached across the table, her thin hand covering his. "You'll figure it out, Dad. You always do." The moment was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. James tensed, memories of yesterday's media frenzy still fresh in his mind. "Mr. Hayes." Sophie's voice called from the other side. "It's Sophie Reynolds. We need to talk." James opened the door, ushering the young lawyer inside. Sophie's usually impeccable appearance was slightly disheveled, her eyes rimmed with dark circles. "I've been up all night reviewing Sharp's legal strategy," she said, dropping a thick folder on the table. "He's not just coming after the inheritance. He's digging into your past, your mother's past, anything he can use against you." James's stomach churned. "What's he found?" Sophie's expression was grim. "Nothing concrete yet, but he's making noise about irregularities in your mother's employment records from her time at Langford Tower." Emily, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "What kind of irregularities?" Sophie hesitated, glancing at James. He nodded, silently giving her permission to continue. "There are gaps in her employment history, periods where she was officially on leave, but still receiving payments from Langford's personal accounts." James felt the blood drain from his face. The implications of Sophie's words hung heavy in the air. Emily's voice was barely above a whisper. "Dad, what's going on?" Before James could respond, his phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was from an unknown number. "Meet me at the tower. Basement level. Come alone. NS." James's jaw clenched. "Sophie, I need you to stay here with Emily. There's something I have to do." "Dad, no." Emily protested, but James was already heading for the door. "Lock up behind me," he called over his shoulder. "And don't open for anyone but me." The drive to Langford Tower was a blur of conflicting emotions. Anger at Sharp's underhanded tactics warred with a growing dread about what he might discover about his mother's past. The basement parking garage was eerily quiet as James stepped out of his car. The fluorescent lights flickered ominously, casting strange shadows in the corners. "Mr. Hayes." Nathaniel Sharp's voice echoed through the concrete space. "I'm glad you could join me." James turned to see the businessman emerge from behind a pillar, a smug smile playing on his lips. "What do you want, Sharp?" Nathaniel's smile widened. "Just a friendly chat about your mother. Lovely woman, Miriam. Such a close relationship with Robert Langford." James's fists clenched at his sides. "You leave my mother out of this." "Oh, but she's at the heart of it all, isn't she?" Nathaniel circled James like a predator. "The maid who caught the billionaire's eye. The secret affair. The love child." "You're talking nonsense," James growled. Nathaniel's eyes glittered dangerously. "Am I? Then perhaps you'd care to explain these." He produced a manila envelope, spilling its contents onto the hood of a nearby car. Photographs cascaded out, intimate images of Miriam and Robert Langford, spanning years. James felt the world tilt beneath his feet. "Where did you get these?" Oh, Robert kept excellent records, Nathaniel purred. Right up until the day your mother died. Such a tragic accident, wasn't it? The implication in Nathaniel's words sent a chill down James's spine. What are you saying? Nathaniel leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. I'm saying that accidents can happen to anyone, James. Even janitors who get ideas above their station. Before James could react, a meaty hand clamped down on his shoulder. He whirled to find himself face to face with a mountain of a man, all muscle and menace. Meet Mr. Grayson, Nathaniel said casually. He'll be handling the more physical aspects of our negotiation. James's mind raced, searching for a way out. His eyes darted around the garage, looking for anything he could use as a weapon or distraction. Grayson's fist came out of nowhere, catching James in the stomach. He doubled over, gasping for air. Now, let's discuss the terms of your surrender, Nathaniel continued, as if nothing had happened. You'll sign over control of Langford Tower to me, effective immediately. In return, I'll ensure that these photos and the truth about your mother never see the light of day. James straightened, fighting through the pain. Go to hell, Sharp. Nathaniel's face darkened. Mr. Grayson, please help Mr. Hayes reconsider his position. The hulking man advanced, cracking his knuckles ominously. James backed away, his eyes scanning the area for an escape route. His gaze landed on a fire extinguisher mounted on a nearby pillar. In one fluid motion, he lunged for it, ripping it from its bracket and swinging it in a wide arc. The extinguisher connected with Grayson's jaw with a sickening crunch. The big man staggered back, momentarily stunned. James didn't waste a second. He turned the nozzle on Nathaniel, blasting him with a cloud of white powder. Sharp stumbled backward, coughing and spluttering. Seizing his chance, James bolted for the exit. He could hear Nathaniel's enraged shouts echoing behind him as he burst out onto the street. His phone buzzed insistently in his pocket. It was Sophie. James, where are you? Something's happened. Not now, he panted, scanning the street for a taxi. I need you to meet me at the police station. Bring everything we have on Langford and Sharp. The police station. James, what's going on? I'll explain everything when I see you. And Sophie, be careful. Sharp's playing for keeps. James flagged down a passing cab, his mind reeling from the confrontation in the garage. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, he caught sight of Nathaniel Sharp emerging from the building, his face contorted with rage. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but the picture they formed was darker than James could have imagined. His mother's death, Langford's secrets, Sharp's desperation to gain control of the tower, it was all connected. And somewhere in the tangle of lies and half-truths lay the key to understanding it all. The taxi wound its way through the city streets, each turn bringing James closer to answers he wasn't sure he was ready to face. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. There was no turning back now. As the police station came into view, James steeled himself for the battle ahead. Whatever secrets lay buried in Langford Tower's past, he was determined to uncover them, no matter the cost. The precinct buzzed with activity as James pushed through the doors. Officers hurried back and forth. Phones rang incessantly, and the air was thick with tension. Can I help you? A desk sergeant eyed James suspiciously. I need to speak with Detective Charles Bryant, James said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through his system. It's urgent. The sergeant's eyebrows rose. And you are? James Hayes. I'm the new owner of Langford Tower. Recognition flickered in the sergeant's eyes. Wait here. Moments later, a grizzled man in a rumpled suit appeared. Detective Bryant's piercing gaze seemed to look right through James. Mr. Hayes, he said gruffly, I've been expecting you. James blinked in surprise. You have. Bryant jerked his head towards an interview room. Let's talk privately. As they settled into the sparse room, Bryant produced a thick file from his briefcase. I've been investigating Robert Langford and his associates for years. Corruption, money laundering, possible connections to organized crime. but I could never get enough evidence to make anything stick. James leaned forward, his heart pounding. And now, Bryant's eyes narrowed. Now I've got you, the missing piece of the puzzle. Before James could respond, the door burst open. Sophie rushed in, her face flushed with exertion. James, thank God you're okay. I was worried when. She stopped short, noticing Detective Bryant. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize. It's all right, Sophie, James said. This is Detective Bryant. He's been investigating Langford Tower. Sophie's eyes widened. Detective, there's something you need to see. She pulled out her tablet, quickly pulling up a series of documents. I've been digging through the tower's financial records. There are discrepancies going back decades. Shell companies' offshore accounts, unexplained transfers. Bryant leaned in, his interest piqued. Show me. As Sophie walked them through her findings, James felt a growing sense of unease. The scope of the corruption was staggering. But why would Langford leave all this to me? He wondered aloud. If he was involved in all this, why not cover his tracks? Bryant's expression was grim. Maybe he was trying to make amends. Or maybe he was setting you up to take a fall, Sophie finished quietly. The implications of her words hit James like a physical blow. He slumped back in his chair, his mind reeling. We need to move fast, Bryant said, standing abruptly. Mr. Hayes, I'm going to need you to come with me to the tower. We need to secure any evidence before Sharp can destroy it. James nodded numbly, still trying to process everything he'd learned. As they prepared to leave, his phone buzzed with a text from Emily. Dad, something weird is happening at the apartment. Strange noises, like someone's trying to get in. I'm scared. James's blood ran cold. He showed the message to Bryant, who immediately sprang into action. I'll send a unit to your place. The detective barked, already dialing. You two, come with me. We're heading to Langford Tower now. As they raced through the city, sirens blaring, James couldn't shake the feeling that they were hurtling towards a confrontation that would change everything. The truth about his mother, about Langford, about the empire he'd inherited, it was all waiting for him in that towering monument to greed and secrecy. And as the familiar silhouette of Langford Tower loomed on the horizon, James knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The Langford Tower loomed before them, its gleaming facade a stark contrast to the darkness James felt closing in around him. Detective Bryant's cruiser screeched to a halt in front of the main entrance, and James was out before the engine died. We need to move fast, Bryant barked, his weathered face set in grim determination. Sharp's people could be destroying evidence as we speak. James nodded, his mind racing. I know every inch of this building. There's a service elevator that'll get us to Langford's office without being seen. As they hurried through the lobby, James's phone buzzed. Emily's name flashed on the screen, sending a jolt of fear through him. Are you okay? Her voice came through, tight with panic. Dad, there's someone in the apartment. I'm hiding in a closet, but I don't know how long. The line went dead. James's world narrowed to a pinpoint of terror. We have to go. Now. Emily's in danger. Bryant's hand clamped down on his shoulder. We can't leave. Whatever's in Langford's office could bring down Sharp's entire operation. It's our only shot. To hell with the operation. James wrenched free. My daughter is being taken care of, Sophie interjected, her fingers flying over her phone. I've alerted the police. They're on their way to your apartment right now. James hesitated, torn between his instinct to protect Emily and the weight of everything they'd uncovered. The fate of the tower, the truth about his mother, the corruption that had claimed so many lives, it all hung in the balance. 30 minutes, he said finally, his voice hoarse. Then I'm gone, evidence or no evidence. The service elevator hummed to life, carrying them swiftly to the upper floors. As the doors slid open, revealing the opulent corridor leading to Langford's office, James felt a chill run down his spine. Something's wrong, he murmured. It's too quiet. They crept forward, the plush carpet muffling their footsteps. The door to Langford's office stood slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling out into the hallway. Brian drew his weapon, motioning for James and Sophie to stay back. With a swift kick, he burst through the door. Freeze! Police! But the office was empty. Papers were strewn across the floor, drawers hung open, and the safe behind Langford's desk gaped like an open wound. "We're too late," Sophie whispered, her face pale. James moved to Langford's desk, his eyes scanning the chaos. Something caught his eye. A small, ornate box tucked beneath a pile of discarded files. As he reached for it, a voice froze him in his tracks. "I wouldn't touch that if I were you, James." Nathaniel Sharp stepped out from behind a hidden panel in the wall, a triumphant smile playing on his lips. In his hand, he held a sleek black pistol. "Quite the little treasure hunt you've led us on," Sharp continued, his eyes gleaming with malice. "But I'm afraid the game ends here." Bryant raised his gun, but Sharp was faster. A sharp crack echoed through the room, and the detective crumpled to the floor, clutching his shoulder. "Now then," Sharp said, turning the gun on James. "Let's discuss the terms of your surrender, shall we?" James's mind raced, searching for a way out. His eyes darted to Sophie, who stood frozen by the door, her face a mask of horror. "What do you want, Sharp?" The businessman's smile widened. "Oh, it's quite simple. You're going to sign over control of Langford Tower to me. In return, I'll ensure that your darling Emily receives the best medical care money can buy." James's blood ran cold. "How do you know about Emily's condition?" Sharp's laughter was cruel. "My dear boy, I know everything about you. Your mother's tragic accident, your struggles to make ends meet, your desperate attempts to save your daughter. Did you really think Langford chose you by chance?" The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. "You've been manipulating this from the start." "Bravo," Sharp mocked. "You're smarter than you look. Now about that signature." James's fists clenched at his sides. "And if I refuse?" Sharp's expression hardened. "Then, I'm afraid Emily's treatment might hit an unfortunate snag. Hospitals can be such dangerous places after all." The world seemed to tilt beneath James's feet. Everything he'd fought for, everything he believed in, was crumbling around him. But then his eyes fell on the ornate box on Langford's desk. Something about it tugged at his memory. A story his mother had told him long ago, about a secret hidden in plain sight. In that moment, James made his choice. "All right, Sharp," he said, his voice steady. "You win. I'll sign over the tower." Sharp's eyebrows rose in surprise. Well, perhaps you're not as foolish as I thought. Sophie, be a dear and draw up the paperwork, won't you?" As Sophie moved to comply, her eyes met James's. For a split second, he saw something flicker there. Regret? Fear? He couldn't be sure. James approached the desk, his heart pounding. As he reached for a pen, his hand brushed against the ornate box. In one fluid motion, he flipped open the lid. A blinding flash erupted from within, filling the room with searing light. Sharp stumbled back, momentarily blinded. James seized his chance. He lunged across the desk, tackling Sharp to the ground. The gun skittered across the floor. They grappled fiercely, Sharp's manicured nails raking across James's face. But years of manual labor had given James a strength that the businessman couldn't match. With a final, desperate surge, James pinned Sharp to the ground. "It's over," he panted, his grip like iron. But Sharp's eyes gleamed with triumph. "Oh, I don't think so." The click of a gun being cocked echoed through the room. James looked up to see Sophie standing over them, Bryant's fallen weapon in her trembling hands. "I'm so sorry, James," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't have a choice." James felt the last vestiges of hope drain away. "Sophie, why?" Her voice broke. "They have my sister. Sharp promised to let her go if I helped him." Sharp's laughter filled the room. "You see, James, everyone has a price. Now, be a good boy and let me up." James's mind raced, searching for a way out. But as he looked into Sophie's tear-filled eyes, he saw something else, a flicker of determination. In that moment, he understood. "Sophie," he said softly, "whatever happens next, I forgive you." Her eyes widened in surprise, and then, with a swift motion, she turned the gun on Sharp. "No more," she said, her voice steel. "It ends now." Sharp's face contorted with rage. "You little—" The rest of his words were lost in the chaos that erupted. Bryant, who had been slowly regaining consciousness, lunged for Sharp. Sophie's gun went off, the bullet embedding itself in the ceiling. And through it all, James's hand closed around the ornate box. As the struggle raged around him, he pried open a hidden compartment in the base. Inside lay a small, leather-bound journal. His mother's handwriting filled the pages, detailing years of corruption, blackmail, and murder. It was the key to unraveling everything: Sharp's empire, Langford's secrets, and the truth about his own past. The sound of sirens filled the air, growing louder by the second. James looked up to see Sharp pinned beneath Bryant, Sophie standing guard with the gun. The detective's eyes met his, a silent question passing between them. With a nod, James made his decision. He would see this through to the end, no matter the cost. As the first police officers burst through the door, James clutched the journal to his chest. Whatever came next, he knew that the truth about his mother, about Langford, about the tower that had defined his life, would finally come to light. And somewhere in the city, Emily waited for him. His daughter, his reason for fighting, the future he would build from the ashes of Langford's corrupt empire. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. The stark white walls of the hospital room seemed to close in on James as he sat by Emily's bedside. The steady beep of monitors provided a grim soundtrack to his daughter's labored breathing. Her once vibrant face was now pale and drawn, a testament to the toll her illness had taken. James clutched his mother's journal, its pages worn from countless readings. The weight of its secrets pressed down on him, a burden he'd carried alone for weeks. A soft knock at the door broke the silence. Sophie stood in the doorway, her eyes red-rimmed and filled with remorse. "James, He held up a hand, cutting her off. "Not here. Not now." Sophie nodded, understanding the unspoken message. This moment was for Emily alone. As if on cue, Emily's eyes fluttered open. "Dad, what's wrong?" James forced a smile, tucking the journal out of sight. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just thinking about the future." Emily's gaze sharpened, seeing through his facade. "You're lying. It's the tower, isn't it? Sharp's still coming after you." James sighed, marveling at his daughter's perceptiveness even in her weakened state. "It's complicated, Em, but I promise I'm going to fix this." Emily's hand found his, her grip surprisingly strong. "Then do it. Stop hiding in here with me and fight back." The words hit James like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on protecting Emily that he'd lost sight of the bigger picture. The corruption, the lies, the truth about his mother, it all needed to be brought to light. With a renewed sense of purpose, James stood. He leaned down, pressing a kiss to Emily's forehead. "You're right. It's time to end this." As he turned to leave, Emily's voice stopped him. "Dad, whatever happens, I'm proud of you." James felt his throat tighten with emotion. He nodded, unable to speak, and stepped out into the hallway. Sophie was waiting, her face a mask of determination. "I've contacted Detective Bryant. He's gathering a team as we speak." James's eyes narrowed. "Can we trust him?" "We don't have a choice," Sophie replied, "but I think he's one of the good ones." They made their way to Langford Tower, the city lights blurring past the taxi windows. James clutched the journal, his mind racing with plans and contingencies. As they approached the towering structure, James saw a flurry of activity at the entrance. Police cars surrounded the building, their lights painting the night in flashes of red and blue. Detective Bryant met them at the door, his face grim. "Sharp's holed up in the penthouse. He's threatening to destroy everything if we try to come in." James's jaw clenched. "Let me talk to him." Bryant shook his head. Too risky. We don't know what he's capable of. I do, James insisted. And I know this building better than anyone. There's a service entrance he won't be watching. Sophie stepped forward. I'm coming with you. James hesitated, searching her face for any sign of deception. Finding none, he nodded. All right, but stay close. They made their way through the back corridors of the tower, James leading them through a maze of maintenance tunnels and hidden passages. As they neared the penthouse, the sound of breaking glass and muffled shouts reached their ears. James held up a hand, signaling Sophie to stop. He crept forward, peering around a corner into Langford's old office. The scene before him was chaos. Papers littered the floor, furniture overturned. In the center of it all stood Nathaniel Sharp, wild-eyed and disheveled. He was furiously feeding documents into a shredder, muttering to himself as he worked. James took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He stepped into the room, his voice steady. It's over, Sharp. The businessman whirled around, his face contorting with rage. How did you get in here? James held up the journal. I know everything. The corruption, the bribes, my mother's death. All of it. Sharp's eyes darted to the journal, a flicker of fear crossing his face. You're bluffing. You don't have proof. Don't I? James opened the journal, revealing pages of meticulous notes and records. My mother was thorough. She documented every illegal deal, every backroom agreement. And now, it's all going public. Sharp lunged forward, reaching for the journal. James sidestepped, using the skills honed from years of manual labor to keep the document out of reach. You fool. Sharp snarled. Do you have any idea what you're doing? The lives you'll ruin. James stood his ground. The only life being ruined here is yours, Sharp. It's time to face the consequences of your actions. As they grappled, Sophie slipped into the room. She made her way to Langford's desk, her fingers flying over the keyboard of his computer. Sharp noticed her presence too late. No. Stop her. But it was already done. With a final keystroke, Sophie sent the contents of Langford's hidden files to every major news outlet in the city. It's over, she said, her voice quiet but firm. The fight seemed to drain out of Sharp. He slumped to the floor, his face a mask of defeat. You don't understand. Langford. He was the mastermind. I was just following orders. James shook his head. That's not good enough. You had a choice, and you chose wrong. The sound of approaching footsteps filled the air. Detective Bryant burst into the room, flanked by a team of officers. Nathaniel Sharp, Bryant announced. You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit murder. As the officers led Sharp away, James felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He turned to Sophie, gratitude shining in his eyes. Thank you for everything. She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. I'm just glad I could help make things right. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of police interviews, press conferences, and legal proceedings. James found himself thrust into the spotlight, hailed as a whistleblower who had exposed years of corporate corruption. But through it all, his thoughts remained with Emily. He spent every free moment by her bedside, reading to her from his mother's journal and sharing the incredible story of how their lives had changed. As Emily's condition stabilized, James threw himself into unraveling the final mysteries of Langford Tower. With Sophie's help, he combed through every inch of the building, searching for clues his mother might have left behind. It was on a quiet Sunday morning that they made the discovery that would change everything. Hidden behind a false panel in Langford's office, they found a set of blueprints. As James unrolled them, his breath caught in his throat. The plans were for Langford Tower itself, but they were unlike anything he'd ever seen. Innovative design elements, sustainable features decades ahead of their time, it was a masterpiece of architectural vision. And there, in the corner of each page, was his mother's signature. She designed it, James whispered, awe in his voice. All of it. Sophie's eyes widened as she took in the implications. Langford must have stolen her designs. That's why. Why she was silenced. James finished, his heart heavy with the weight of the truth. In that moment, James knew what he had to do. He would restore his mother's legacy, transforming Langford Tower into the beacon of innovation and integrity she had always envisioned. Weeks turned into months. As Emily's health improved, James threw himself into the work of rebuilding the tower's reputation and operations. He established a foundation in his mother's name, dedicated to supporting young architects and designers from underprivileged backgrounds. The day finally came when Emily was strong enough to visit the tower. James led her to the observation deck, the city sprawling out before them in a tapestry of light and shadow. Emily's eyes shone with wonder as she took in the view. "It's beautiful, Dad. I can't believe all of this is ours." James smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Not just ours, Em. It belongs to everyone who's been touched by this story. The workers, the investors, the people of this city. Your grandmother's vision is finally becoming a reality." As they stood there, bathed in the golden light of sunset, James felt a sense of peace wash over him. The journey had been long and fraught with danger, but they had emerged stronger for it. He thought of his mother, of the sacrifices she had made, and the dreams she had nurtured. In a way, she was still with them, her spirit woven into the very fabric of the building that now bore her name. Emily leaned into him, her voice soft with emotion. "What happens now?" James gazed out at the city, his mind filled with possibilities. "Now, we build, we grow, we make this tower a force for good in the world." He turned to his daughter, a smile playing on his lips. "We built this, Mom and I, and we're just getting started." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in a warm glow, James knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The legacy of Langford Tower, no Miriam Hayes Tower, was secure, a testament to the power of truth, perseverance, and the unbreakable bonds of family. The story of the janitor, who inherited a skyscraper, had captured the world's imagination. But for James and Emily, it was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, purpose, and the promise of a brighter future.